The solar plexus is the number 2 center in terms of conditioning impact that has the most influence. And the solar plexus is also an awareness center. Yes, it's a nascent awareness center because we as humans really can't tap into the intelligence that is riding within the emotional energy that is the waveform of the solar plexus. But nonetheless, it is one of our 3 awareness centers, and thus it is a prime center in terms of conditioning. And the prime center is a center that really affects how we see. It's related to the nodes of the moon. That's how we see in the environment. So conditioning in the solar plexus is certainly going to have a major impact in one's life. And in terms of the split of defined emotional center people versus undefined, well, it's almost exactly 50-50. So you can't go far in this world without either being a conditioner as an emotional person or being conditioned as somebody carrying an undefined solar plexus center. And if this center is defined in anybody's design, it doesn't matter what type that person is, projector, manifestor, generator, the solar plexus is the inner authority. And of course, the strategy of those with an emotional center defined is that there is no truth in the now, which means for 50% of us humans, there's no clarity in the now. And in fact, their definition is so narrow. Always remember that when you see definition, it's not some big fat pipe of a channel. It's right down to the base level. It's the very thin, fixed, narrow line that is defined. And thus, not only are these people not able to see the truth in the now, it is a tiny part of the spectrum that is available in terms of the solar plexus itself. And so with an undefined solar plexus in one's design, there is the potential for enormous distortion. Remember, whenever definition comes in this center, if it's ordinarily undefined, it's not only turned on, it's amplified. And that amplification effect also brings its own distortion, just like turning up a stereo where the speakers are not capable of handling the power. There's all kinds of distortion that comes from that. And thus, this is what leads to the strategy of the not-self mind in terms of the solar plexus, which is avoiding confrontation and avoiding the truth. And the avoidance of confrontation, well, this is a direct result of the nature of the solar plexus. This is an awareness center. We have 3 awareness centers, and thus they're all conditioned through fear. The splenic center, existential survival fears, so these are real fears. The solar plexus center, yes, they're fears, but they're not survival fears. If this was a survival center, it would certainly not be no truth in the now. So the fear in the solar plexus is more like a nervousness about the potential of confrontation. And thus the byproduct of this strategy of avoiding confrontation and truth is that one can end up avoiding life altogether, because it's almost impossible for someone with an undefined solar plexus that's in a connection, for example, with somebody with a defined solar plexus, to end things cleanly and begin anew somewhere else. It's because of the constant avoidance of that potential confrontation that the ending of something would bring. So people with an undefined solar plexus, there's always an underlying nervousness about the potential of confrontation when their not-self mind meets emotional conditioning. And this nervousness also goes for nervous about the truth. Nervous about confrontation, nervous about the truth, nervous about, well, the result of what this conditioning is bringing. So really the fear of the solar plexus through the not-self mind is a fear of the consequences of what confrontation could bring. because the consequences in terms of the emotional center is that they are going to be subject to an emotional wave. Confrontation brings the emotional dynamic of the wave, and it's amplified in the person with the undefined emotional system. And what to do? Well, if you follow your mind for decision making, it really leads to a potential of never truly having an honest relationship with other people. Never truly saying what one means because of the fear of the consequences of the wave suddenly erupting. And of course there's an attraction from the undefined to the defined solar plexus, because the emotional center is not all waves and doom and gloom. It's passion, it's excitement. It can be a truly delicious center, the emotional system, but every now and then with unaware emotional people, well, you end up paying for that deliciousness with some kind of amplified negative wave coming back at some point. This is why there's always that underlying nervousness. And what to do if you have an undefined solar plexus? Well, the first thing to understand is that there is nothing to fear from the emotional system. And the way to get rid of that nervousness is to be prepared to confront. Confrontation is the only thing that will rid one of that underlying nervousness that's perpetually there. This calculation of potential consequences that the not-self mind is involved in. Oh, if I do this, I know what's going to happen. I'm not going to do that. And everything in terms of that process has happened in the mind related to the nervousness it feels and its inability to confront, and thus withdrawing from whatever situation that nervousness is building up in. Whereas, of course, if you can get beyond the conditioning and the way the not-self mind distorts the thinking relating to that conditioning, if you get beyond that, there's wisdom in an undefined solar plexus. And something in terms of confrontation as simple as saying to an emotional person, look, you know very well that when you wake up tomorrow morning, you are going to feel very differently. The problem with emotional people is that they believe whatever mood they're in now is their mood forever. And the wisdom of the undefined solar plexus is just to remind them, look, this too shall pass. Don't ruin everything now. Don't ruin our relationship by believing that this is your truth now. And it's not just generic nervousness based on the emotionality that is impacting one. And we have all of these gates in different energy circuits that have their own waveform in the solar plexus. So we'll quickly go through each of these so you get a sense of what the nervousness is all about related to each of the gates here. We'll start with the sixth gate, because ultimately it's out of the sixth gate that the whole emotional wave system begins, is initiated. These are the three waves of passion, the individual wave of desire, the abstract wave, and need, the tribal wave. The source of all of this is the sixth gate, and the sixth gate is part of the channel of intimacies, the channel of mating, and thus the avoidance here in the sixth gate quality is an avoidance of intimacy, because ultimately intimacy reveals truth. There's avoidance of confrontation and truth. So this ultimately leads to a kind of shallowness in intimacy when the sixth gate is part of that not-self strategy. There becomes a kind of glazed persona that's just not true. And that persona is there to protect from confrontation, and that's there to protect the truth from being revealed. We'll move to the two tribal gates next. The 49th gate, part of the channel of synthesis. This is the gate of principles. And of course, being an emotional gate, those principles change depending on the nature of where that emotional wave is. So there's a deep fear in the 49 of unpredictability. There's a real heaviness in this energy, because ultimately the 1949 moving through the 37 to the 40 is the stream of religion for the tribe. So this is a fear of God, ultimately, the consequences of that unpredictability. So these people ultimately just won't fight for their principles. They might go over it in their mind over and over and over again, but when it comes down to it, the fear of confrontation, the fear of the consequences of staying with one's principles is what leads the not-self mind to abandoning those principles. The principle is given up long before the confrontation would ever occur. So there's a deep nervousness about this unpredictability in the 49, and because of that, there's always an avoidance of confrontation by the not-self mind, and thus there is no confrontation, and the nervousness stays inside. Moving to the 37th gate, also tribal, part of the channel of community, and again the tribe. This is about tribal traditions, nervousness about confronting tribal traditions, the family. This is the way we've always done this. So everybody has to conform to this tribal standard, and thus there's a fear of not being able to conform, or a fear of being forced to conform here in the 37. But the nervousness in the 37, it's the fear of confronting those tribal traditions. We always go to grandma's on Sundays, and all of you are going to come, and we're going to maintain this tradition. So it ends up being a kind of controlling mechanism. You just go along with that tradition flow because of the fear of confronting that. Moving on to the 30th gate now, we'll look at the abstract part of the emotional dynamic here. The abstract is this desire wave that can build up. And the 30th gate, well, we know this is the clinging fire. Ultimately, it's the gate of the fates. So this is nervousness or fear of the fates. I cannot confront this because of what the fates might do to me. So nervous about engaging in experience because of the consequence of what the fates might do. The not-self mind is riding this wave. Will it happen? Yes, it might happen in the up wave. Oh no, it's not going to happen in the down wave. Oh, it could be great. Oh no, it's not going to be so great. This is the mind going up and down on this emotional wave. And in the back of the mind there is this fear of the fates always throwing their wrench, their spanner in the works, and interfering in the best laid plans. So in a way there's a nervousness about dreaming about ideals with the 30th gate, because it's like the dream can never be. The fates will come in and take it away from me. So what's the point of dreaming? Why get all excited about something that's never going to happen? So this kind of takes the wind out of the sails. If you're never going to run after your dream, you're never going to get towards that dream, and the nervousness stays in the system and ends up leading to a mind, depending on the type strategy that mind is operating through, the bitter projector, the angry manifester, the deeply frustrated generator. All of this gets locked in because of the fear built into the 30 about the unexpected fickle finger of the fates. Staying with this abstract stream, moving up to the 36th gate. This is part of a manifesting channel, the channel of transitoriness. Well, ultimately, this 36 is a fear of the potential of crisis. The fear of some experience that one has engaged in going pie-shaped, going rotten. The fear that one is not competent to go through the entirety of that experience. The fear that you might not be able to perform if there's some sexual experience going on. So ultimately there is a fear of inadequacy in the 36th gate. avoiding the confrontation and thus the truth because of this nervousness about the feeling of inadequacy. Moving to the 55th gate, the first of two individual knowing energies in terms of the emotional system. This is the stream ultimately that's a kind of romantic energy, the search for ideals. This is the gate of spirit, the cup that's half full or half empty, depending on the nature of where that emotional wave is. It's the stream of passion, a passion for pleasure or pain. And thus there's a fear in the 55 about the loss of potential spirit. It doesn't want to lose its spirit. So there's a fear in the 55th gate of emptiness. So the 55 in terms of the not self mind, it's the fear of confronting because the consequence, the fear of not having anything in one's life to love, the fear of not having something that one is passionate about. And confrontation can take that away, so I'm going to avoid that, says the 55. And finally, the 22nd gate, part of the same stream of passion. This is part of the manifesting channel, the channel of openness in terms of the emotional center. And it's part of really the only social dynamic for individuality. Mutation ultimately has to be passed on, otherwise it dies stillborn in the deaf individuals that are holding that. So there's a fear in the 22nd gate of just being ignored, the fear of silence coming from that other. Oh, if I confront this, they're going to give me the silent treatment. I don't like the silent treatment, so I'm not going to rock the boat here. I'm not even going to pass on my wonderful idea here in fear of ridicule and thus silence from the other. And if I get the silent treatment, well, I'm left out in the cold alone. And yes, this is one of the gates of aloneness, but the 22nd really doesn't like that, certainly in the social context.